Hello, America. Wow, what a controversial week, huh? Especially with the president asking, hey, can you just tell me 5 things that you're doing last week so I know you actually exist and are working? How dare him? That's outrageous. Well, the Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE, has been extremely busy making all kinds of outrageous demands like that one. Elon Musk is vowing to find $1 trillion in cuts. I hope he can do it. It's driving the left absolutely bat-crap crazy, and it's a beautiful thing to witness. I mean, to watch them go crazy couldn't happen to a nicer group of people. So, while DOGE has its magnifying glass out, I think perhaps we should turn our attention to what would be the granddaddy of all audits. The final opening of not only the Federal Reserve, but all the books on America's gold. There's something big going on with gold right now. I'm not going to explain it other than there's kind of like a run on the gold supply around the world. I'm not sure what it is, but this new era that we're in, this transparency of government, I don't think it's too much just to say, hey, can I look under America's economic hood and make sure everything checks out with our gold engine? You know, because we supposedly have gold in Fort Knox. We supposedly have gold in West Point. We supposedly have gold in Denver. And we also have it at the Federal Reserve in New York. And it's all marked U.S. gold. It's all ours. We got it. Well, we haven't seen it for a long time. So what should we do? Well, over the past half century, we've become so used to our government just playing with monopoly money, just printing cash like it's going out of style, something they swore to me 15 years ago, we would never do that. Well, they're doing it. Most people don't consider the importance of gold anymore, but it's a pretty big deal. And it's something I've been talking about for a very, very long time. Here I am 15 years ago.
I'm using this as a gold doorway because I want you to understand this is a door frame into insanity. You get to this point, things are nuts. It's like California. How nuts does it have to be in California when there's an earthquake to where you say, where is the only place that could possibly save me because the entire house is coming down? They tell you, stand in the door frame. Now, it's better to be outside. It's better to not be in a building. It's better to, not live in California for a lot of reasons. But if worse comes to worse, and you have to stand there, you stand in the doorway. It's the safest place. Economically speaking, that has always been gold. It is the refuge and the safety net from inflation.
And insanity. So last week, I sent a letter to President Trump requesting a full audit of our nation's largest gold reserve, which supposedly is stored right here at Fort Knox. And it's been there for the past 90 years. The idea of cracking open the vault and letting Americans see if our gold is still there, I don't know, seems like pretty low-hanging fruit. At a very dangerous time when Americans are more skeptical than ever about our government, the Treasury, the Fed, the IRS, the financial elites, confirming what's inside of, Fort Knox, might go a long way to help it restore some measure of faith in our institutions, especially our monetary system, which is just, as I usually say, the floatiest piece of crap in the toilet bowl. It all is crap, but America's on the top. Right. It boils down to this. If America's gold reserves are totally secure, as the government claims, then we should have no reason why we can't see it ourselves. Now, I don't mean we make Fort Knox into, a tourist attraction, although I think it would make money. But allow some trusted eyewitnesses and skeptics with cameras to go inside to verify what's in there. I mean, I'd go in, I'd sign something that says if I ever, divulge how to get into the vault or how it's stacked or whatever the secrets are, you're going to throw me in prison. But I want to know that it is all there. Well, good news. Late last week, President Trump seemed to agree.
We do want to look. We hope everything's fine with Fort Knox, but we're going to go to Fort Knox, the fabled Fort Knox, to make sure the gold is there.
Where would the gold have gone?
If the gold isn't there, we're going to be very upset.
Okay. It would be very bad if the gold wasn't in there. But there are, remember, 4 places that we need to check. Only a presidential order can open the vault at Fort Knox. And other than FDR, no president that we know of has ever visited Fort Knox. In 1941, the U.S. had 649.6 million ounces of gold stored at Fort Knox. Today, it has about 147.3 million ounces. So what happened to the rest? Well, it's partially supposed to be in 3 other vaults, and we used a lot of it to rebuild Europe after World War II. But let me rewind a minute to explain. From the late 1800s through roughly the start of World War II, the U.S. monetary system operated on the gold standard. That meant that every dollar was worth a dollar of gold. You could go to a bank and say, I want this in gold, not paper, and they'd have to give it to you. The gold was held by the U.S. government. No nation today follows the gold standard. None. World War II and Bretton Woods agreement kind of blew up the true gold standard. We were the only ones. In 1944, as victory was looking more likely for the Allies, the United Nations organized a conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to chart a new financial course for post-World War. And what did they come up with? Well, the biggest outcome of Bretton Woods was that the leading Western powers agreed to establish the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Countries could exchange dollars for gold at a rate of $35 an ounce. Notice I said countries were allowed to do that. U.S. citizens couldn't exchange their dollars for gold, but I'll come back to that later. By 1960, though, this system was already starting to fall apart. Why? Well, 2 good reasons. Vietnam War, war's very expensive, and so are socialist programs like Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Both cost massive amounts of money, and we didn't have enough gold to do both. And why choose boopy when you don't have to? We just got off the gold standard and decided, don't worry about it. We'll just keep printing money. Except we weren't keeping up. We were digging ourselves a giant hole, and all those extra dollars flooding the system meant that the U.S. didn't have enough physical gold to cover the dollar at $35 an ounce, according to the Bretton Woods Agreement. We were all in sudden danger of losing all of our gold supply and the world's reserve currency. Did you know that France sent warships to New York to get their gold? I would have loved to see that. France, the president then, Charles de Gaulle, took advantage of the vulnerability and aggressively redeemed hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. gold and brought it back to France. And by 1971, this drain on U.S. gold reserves caused President Nixon to basically end the Bretton Woods system by halting foreign nations from converting their U.S. dollars into gold. Nixon preserved what was left of our gold, but his action also meant that the dollar was no longer pegged to any kind of gold standard. It became the petrodollar, backed on Saudi oil. A decade later, President Reagan formed a commission to study returning to the gold standard, but the commission determined, it wasn't really in our interest, to do that. Kind of an interesting side note, one congressman who was on that commission dissented from the majority's opinion. It was Congressman Ron Paul. And 30 years later, in 2011, he was still talking about returning to the gold standard and doing a full audit of the gold at Fort Knox. Today, America's gold is still a key federal asset. In fact, we have much more gold by far than any other country in the world. But it's not part of our monetary system. It's just an asset on our sheet, and it hasn't been part of our monetary system for decades. So if we're not on gold anymore, the standard, why do we need the gold in Fort Knox? Why do we need to audit it? Because gold still undergirds our financial system, kind of like a fail-safe. As former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan once told Ron Paul, you hold on to the gold, quote, just in case we need it. You hold on to it because it's the ultimate in money, kind of that golden door frame from 15 years ago. We also need to know the status of our government's gold because there are some major shifts taking place in the gold market today. Someone is buying a crap load of gold. There are record amounts of it arriving at COMEX, the commodity exchange in New York City. The Financial Times blames this surge on fears about Trump's tariffs. Maybe. Or is it something else? What if the U.S. Fed is buying up gold, trying to shore up our balance sheet to make us look healthier than we really are? Or maybe we're reshoring the gold that might have been leased out. I'll explain in a minute. Or maybe some combination of both, perhaps to prepare for a major shift in our entire financial system. What would that shift look like? Well, recently, new U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said we're going to, quote, monetize the asset side of the U.S. balance sheet for the American people. What does that mean? He says it doesn't include gold, but what does it include? And if it includes the U.S. revaluing its gold, the U.S. Treasury right now has that stockpile, and it is priced at $42 an ounce because that was the level set by the law in 1973. Meanwhile, the real world has gold selling at almost $3,000 an ounce. Now imagine for a moment if the U.S. gold stockpile were revalued to reflect the true market prices. And then imagine if this was used as a stabilizing force for the dollar, or maybe even a partial return to the gold standard. Maybe as a stabilizing force to fight inflation. Maybe as a way to stop printing so much money. It could be a game changer. Could be. Because remember, we have to see if the gold is still in the vaults. Now, let me burst the bubble of my own daydream here with a little problem called rehypothecation. Haven't talked to you about this in years. Now, what rehypothecation is basically, I think, the closest thing you can get to a Ponzi scheme. If we use rehypothecation for our gold, we're in trouble. Let me explain. Let's just use cars and the Hertz rental car because this is going to hurt. Let's say Hertz rental car goes to Bank One and they're asking for a loan because they want to buy a 1976 Firebird, okay? Well, the bank loans Hertz $60,000, but they keep that Firebird as collateral or an asset on their sheet, okay? So Hertz rental cars has that. They then put that on their sheet as an asset as well. 1976 Firebird, $60,000. They go to another bank and they ask another bank, I got to buy another one of these. Can I get a loan? And the other bank, they do the same thing. They give a loan of $60,000 and they use the same 1976 Firebird as collateral. Then you come in and rent it. Now, if you came in and leased it, and remember that word because that's what they do with gold, the first person leases the gold. So let's say you come in and you want to lease the Firebird. That's great. That's the way the system works. But see, you usually stop there because anything past here is kind of illegal. So you lease it, but then you go to the bank and you go, hey, I've got this Firebird. I need a $60,000 loan. I'll give this to you as an asset or collateral. And the bank says, okay. So they loan you $60,000 and they put on their asset sheet and collateral as the 1976 Firebird. Then they go to Bank 3, which gives another loan for a Firebird, which they use as collateral asset. And then this bank needs another 60 grand. So they go to Bank 4 and Bank 4 loans Bank 3 $60,000 and uses the Firebird as collateral. Are you seeing the problem here? Bank 4 goes to Bank 5. They use the Firebird as collateral or asset and they loan $60,000. So you're about $360,000 in for the same damn car. And you have 6 people claiming it's an asset. Now, this is all fine and dandy unless this guy defaults and this guy says, I need the asset. I need the asset. I need the asset here. You're not repaying me, so I have to have it. One does it, okay. However, if there's a problem, and don't worry, this will never happen. If there's a problem, and a lot of these people say, hey, I need that asset, I need that car right now, I need the collateral, call that in. Who owns the car? Do these guys own it? Or these guys? Or you? Or this bank? Or this bank, this bank, this bank? Which one? See, I looked up the difference between rehypothecation and Ponzi. And in a nutshell, there's some differences, but in a nutshell, it's pretty much the government can rehypothesize gold, but they can't allow you to engage in a Ponzi scheme. That's pretty much the difference. Same thing. We need to know that America's gold is America's gold, period. Did you know that when Germany asked the Federal Reserve for their gold back about 10, 15 years ago, it took 4 years to get it back to be fully accounted for. And it seems as though they might have melted the gold down because it no longer had the markings of German gold. Why? That's weird. Anyway, but it was pure. Okay, so we need to know that it's accounted for. And we need to know it because it undergirds the financial system, the full faith and credit of the United States. Our trust in government begins with the gold. So, do we start with Fort Knox? You know, no full audit of gold has been conducted there since 1953. Wait until you hear this story next. All right, Jace Medical would like to thank all of the first responders out there as we've been dealing with snow, fires, intense weather, all global warming or global cooling. You never know. It's easy to forget how many people put their lives on the line to save their fellow Americans and their neighbors. But first responders can't be everywhere. You know, first responder, that term came from the one and only Jimmy Carter, and we're still using it today. Because when it comes to emergencies, the things you have to remember that the government doesn't want you to remember is you're the actual first responder. One of the most important tools you can have in your kit is a Jace case. I can't recommend this highly enough. If you're the type of person who wants to be prepared if and when disaster strikes or just problems, you're absolutely going to want this for your home. Jace case. It is a personalized emergency kit that contains essential antibiotics and medications that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. It provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. They even have ivermectin as an add-on if you want it. If you're a horse, go to jace.com and enter their giveaway or purchase your own case right now. Enter the promo code Beck at checkout and get a discount on your order. It's promo code Beck at jase.com. This is going to blow your mind. Year of my birth, 1964. James Bond, new film, Goldfinger. Goldfinger. Bond has to stop the international gold smuggler, Goldfinger, from setting off a dirty bomb inside of Fort Knox to contaminate America's gold stash with radioactivity. If he gets away with it, America's gold will be worthless, and the value of Goldfinger's gold would skyrocket. It was a brilliant plan, yes. And he would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those pesky kids and their dog. Oh, and that meddling Bond guy. A lot of people thought the Goldfinger scenes that take place inside of Fort Knox with the cathedral-like, vault with giant stacks of gold is what the inside of Fort Knox actually looks like. But we don't know. We have no idea. How would we ever know? Nobody's allowed to check it out. Nobody knows. And that's a good thing, I guess. I watched Ocean's 11. It could happen. Anyway, why does the U.S. supposedly have so much gold stored at Fort Knox? Well, it all started with the greatest robbery in American people history. Well, maybe it wasn't technically a robbery, but it was definitely a robbery in spirit. And it all came through a very king dictator-like move, which means, of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was behind it in 1933. The Depression was gaining steam, and FDR had just been in the White House for a few months when he issued the Executive Order 6102 to confiscate, to nationalize all of the privately held gold in the entire country. You had any gold, coins, bullion, gold certificates, otherwise known as dollars back then, worth over $100? Well, FDR's order gave you 1 month to hand it all over to the Fed. Give it to the government, who paid you a whopping $20.67 per ounce for your gold. Failure to comply, well, that meant a $10,000 fine and or a prison sentence for up to 10 years. Well, in no time, the federal government had 5,000 tons of new gold, which was melted down into 368,000 bars that weighed 27.5 pounds each. 9 months later, FDR still not satisfied. He told Congress, quote, "The practice of transferring gold from one individual to another or from the government to an individual within a nation is not only necessary, it's in every way undesirable." So 2 weeks later, Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act, which gave the U.S. Treasury complete control of all remaining private stores of gold. Now, the day after that new law passed, FDR devalued the dollar, setting its new value at $35 per ounce of gold. That means the $20 per ounce people were given to hand over their gold was now pretty much worth 40% less. Thanks, big government. In under 2 years, FDR had pulled off the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history. By the way, Americans were not allowed to personally own gold again until 1974, when President Ford signed a new law. Now, where was the U.S. government going to store all of this gold that it had taken from the American people? Well, in 1935, construction began on the U.S. Bullion Depository building at Fort Knox in Kentucky. Fort Knox was already a 109,000-acre U.S. Army base. Now it would also become the home of what is widely considered the world's most secure vault. Now here's what little we do know about it. The outer wall is 4 feet thick, made out of granite-lined concrete with guard towers and several layers of fencing. Inside, the elevator goes down to the storage level where the vault door weighs 22 tons, and it's blast-proof and drill-resistant. No single person knows how to unlock the vault. It requires several people to complete the procedures. Inside are multiple smaller vault rooms with 27-inch thick doors. Wow. Is Terry Benedict running it? A 2012 History Channel documentary explored some additional security features in the vault.
As to the deterrence, gas does exist, so that if the door or the lock is attacked in such a way as to activate the gas charge, it would fill up that room.
There's multiple rumors about the gold vault. One of them is that it can be flooded, and that is backed up by the original newspaper clippings from the 1930s. It was designed after a method used by the Bank of France. Now, whether that feature was incorporated into final construction, only the Treasury Department knows, and they're not saying.
Nobody knows. It's a mystery. So the U.S. Mint reports that we currently have over 248 million ounces of gold reserves. Fort Knox is to be said to be holding 147 million ounces, and the rest divided between the vaults in Denver and West Point and the Federal Reserve in New York. During World War II, the original Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address were transferred to the vault at Fort Knox for safekeeping. The vault also supposedly houses a lot of diamonds and even an emergency stash of drugs like morphine. All right, man. But again, outside of the Treasury Department, who knows? Earlier, I mentioned that there had been no audit of the gold in Fort Knox since 1953, and even that's kind of like, really? When President Eisenhower first took office, there was concern about the stability of the U.S. gold supply because of the landslide of money spent fighting World War II, rebuilding Europe, and fighting the Korean War. So Eisenhower put together a commission headed by his Treasury Secretary. I mean, he would never lie. This commission went to the gold vault at Fort Knox. They conducted their audit and concluded that the gold was all there and everything looked really, really good. But according to the Treasury Secretary's report, they only opened 3 of the gold compartments, which only represented 13.6% of the total 22 sealed compartments at Fort Knox at the time. Now, wait a minute. So Fort Knox, and we put all the gold together. Fort Knox, you can go to a cage, which they did in the 1950s, and go, whew, okay, the gold's in there. And we count. One. Okay. They counted 88,000 gold bars in this compartment, weighed 9,000 of those bars, drilled 26 bars, selected at random to test the purity, and it was all fine. But nobody opened the other rooms at all. They just opened this one. We didn't look. So we've only verified in the 50s 13% of all of the gold. We have no idea if there's gold in these vaults or not. And that's just in Fort Knox. Media coverage about DOGE checking into Fort Knox often mentions that an audit hasn't been conducted since 1953, but it wasn't a full audit. It was one vault. Okay. That's the last time anybody counted some of the bars. 21 years later, as allies were draining our gold reserves through the Bretton Woods Agreement and Vietnam and LBJ's welfare programs, public pressure mounted again. And they're like, can we look at the stockpile? Can we just see it maybe? So in September of 1974, the Treasury allowed a select group of journalists and congressmen inside of the Fort Knox vault with cameras to check the gold and reaffirm to the American public that, yes, the gold was there, safe and secure.
And the floodlights from the television and from the still cameras, flash bulbs popping, going off the gold.
Believe that? Look at that. There's one to the ceiling.
We had an opportunity to pick it up and feel it and make sure it was gold. It was a little bit awe-inspiring, and I just wanted to sit and look at it for a few minutes.
It says approximately 22 pounds.
Most of the visitors left satisfied, having seen firsthand the magnificent contents of the cell.
Well, who wouldn't be satisfied with good old Mitch McConnell being one of those guys? Question settled. No more questions. Right. Actually, this only created way more questions because remember, in the 50s, they opened up 3 of the vaults, okay? And they found, no, everything's there. Well, skeptics wondered why this time we were only allowed to see 1 of the cells in the vault. We weren't allowed to see, we could see that one, look, we could see that one, but we couldn't see this one. We couldn't see this one, and we couldn't see this one. But maybe there was gold in those cells. We're sure there was. The quality of the gold was questioned based on the way it appeared in the TV and in photos. The weight of the gold was also questioned. The size of the total stockpile at Fort Knox was questioned based on the estimates of the gold bars in the cell that was open for the cameras. You remember, they opened this one. See, it's right there. And you don't believe us? We could open these, but we're not going to, of course. Unlike the sort of audit in the 1950s, the publicity stunt counted none of the bars. They didn't check any of the serial numbers against the official records, nor did they test it for the purity of gold. I mean, it's gold, right? Did the gold they were shown even belong to us? Or were we leasing it? Still, the Fort Knox vault was slammed shut to visitors for another 43 years. 2017, Treasury Secretary at the time, Steve Mnuchin, he visited with a few congressmen, including the then Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. Oh, good times were had by all, really. They got their souvenir photos with the gold, and that was it. But there you have it. A tiny portion of what is supposed to be, our nation's largest gold stockpile has been observed by a handful of agents, government agents, journalists, and politicians, a grand total of 3 times in the 88-year history at Fort Knox in the gold vault. So, yeah, I just think maybe a visit from DOGE might be overdue. But what happens if we check Fort Knox? Are we going to find gold also at West Point? Will there be gold in Denver? Will there be gold at the Federal Reserve? Our gold, with our name, our serial numbers, and it's pure. Back in a minute to tell you what happens if we open up the vault and it's like, oh my gosh, Geraldo Rivera is in the vault. It'd be bad. Next.
In the UK, Queen Elizabeth was checking out real gold at the Bank of England. Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh saw 63,000 gold bars during a tour of a vault at the bank. The bars were stacked in 8 rows. Each 4-ton stack is 4 shelves high, and each bar weighs 29 pounds. The vault is one of 9 in which the bank stores $323 billion worth of gold.
Wow. That footage is from 2012. Apparently, Britain has no problem letting cameras into their vault. I mean, I think they might have been selling cotton candy behind the Queen. I'm not sure. Doesn't seem that hard, but then again, maybe they've kept better track of their gold and have less to hide. Or maybe, you know what? I really believe if we check all 4 vaults, there's got to be gold in all 4, right? I mean, if it wasn't that way, America would be over. But we're only asking to see this vault and only one room, possibly in dozens of rooms. We need to see all of them. And then we also need to see all of the vaults like at the same time, because could you imagine? I mean, you know, you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I'm going to go to Fort Knox. Look, it's there. And why don't you join us next week? Because next week we're going to go to West Point. Yeah, see, it's there. And then next week we're going to go to Denver. And look, it's there. And then we're going to go to... We have to open them all at once to make sure that we're not just moving gold, the same gold. In the late 1980s, an author named Christopher Weber was summoned to Virginia farm of a wealthy businessman named Edward Durrell. Durrell had spent over a decade and tens of thousands of dollars researching the status of U.S. gold reserve. Durrell's research led him to conclude that there was basically no gold left at Fort Knox. We don't know. Essentially, he claimed the gold had been siphoned off to the Federal Reserve in New York and eventually sold to Europe. Well, that could have happened. Durrell was nearing the end of his life and wanted Weber to write a book based on all of his research. Weber had previously helped write a 1982 book by Congressman Ron Paul titled The Case for Gold. Weber went on to write about Durrell's research, including an interesting visit Durrell received from the General Accounting Office in 1975. Durrell had hounded government officials for months, including the Treasury Secretary and congressmen, about the status of America's gold. The GAO sent 4 agents to his home to try to convince him that it was all there, buddy. It was just a few months after that Fort Knox visit I mentioned earlier when a group of journalists and politicians were allowed to view one of the vault rooms full of gold. One of the GAO agents admitted to Edward Durrell and later confirmed in a letter to him that, quote, "We analyzed, as agreed, the gold bar schedules for Fort Knox and found that fine gold in good delivery form, 9.995 or better, at Fort Knox totaled 24 million ounces of gold from the 701 million ounces that were supposed at the peak." So wait, I mean, that's less than 10% of the 264 million that we have. What happened to it? In 1975, it was all considered fine gold. The gold was suitable for international trade. Now it's not. Supposedly at its peak in 1941, Fort Knox held over 649 million ounces of gold. So according to that GAO agent, in 34 years, about 96% of America's fine gold gone. Where did I put that gold? The U.S. Mint now says Fort Knox holds over 147 million ounces of gold. But what does that mean? Is it gold in delivery form? Is it still only 24 million ounces of fine gold? Is this even our gold? All of that to say, when Elon Musk and President Trump finally flip the cameras on inside Fort Knox, they better prepare themselves to either be disappointed or prepare themselves to make sure that they are thorough. If the gold is gone, if it's there but it doesn't belong to the U.S., our government couldn't admit that. It just couldn't. It would be over for us overnight. If there was no real stockpile of gold, it would melt down the entire global financial system and destroy whatever remaining credibility the Fed and the dollar might have on the world stage. That's why I say, we're going to find the gold in Fort Knox. Can we open all of the gold and make sure we do a thorough accounting? I've repeatedly explored this on my shows, how the lack of government transparency gives rise to speculation and conspiracy theories and doubts and cynicism. It's what fuels the overall lack of trust. And that's not how the American system of government is supposed to be. It was set up to be as transparent and trustworthy as possible. But when there is no transparency and accountability, distrust festers and grows. Again, I think our gold is there. It damn well better be. But why can't you show it to us? Why can the Queen come in with, like, I don't know, was that like a school children bus that we're taking a tour? You know, we're on a field trip. The Queen just happened to stop by too. In the age of modern monetary theory and printing as much money as you want, America's gold supply is almost an afterthought. But it shouldn't be. Fort Knox is symbolic of the government secrecy that Americans are sick of. We're sick of the government abuse. Americans would much rather know the truth. We're adults. You can't handle the truth. Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. Even if it's ugly. We'd rather have that than be in a constant state of doubt that our government is telling us the truth. It's time, once and for all, to find out about all of it. After a quick break, I'm going to talk to somebody who's been trying to get many of these questions answered for years, and maybe one of the first people to see what's in the vault. Our good friend, Senator from Utah, Mike Lee, next.
Do you have any plans to visit Kentucky?
I don't have any plans. I can tell you that we do an audit every year. I can tell the American people on camera right now that there was a report September 30th, 2024. All the gold is there. Any U.S. senator who wants to come and visit it can arrange a visit through our office.
That might be a surprise to some of the senators. Joining me now is the always knowledgeable, reliably constitutional U.S. Senator from Utah, Mr. Mike Lee. Senator, you've asked to go several times, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And I never got a response like that one. I was told instead to pound sand.
Really?
They told me, you can't possibly go there. Well, why? It's a military installation. I said, well, I'm a senator. I go to military bases all the time. Still can't go there. So I'm glad that Scott Bessent feels differently than the pinheads I've spoken to over the years.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Have you reached out to him, or will you reach out to him?
Yeah, that's coming, and I want to get up there as soon as possible.
Could I be a page boy?
Yes, of course. I mean, I would never go anywhere without my page boy, Glenn Beck.
Right, that's right. I have to tell you, I mean, I don't understand. First of all, you have to see it. It can't just be an inside job. You have to have some skeptics there as well, but reliable people. You have to know they're going to be reliable on security. I mean, we're not going to invite Danny Ocean, I'm sure. But I mean, I'd be willing to sign anything. You could put me in jail for the rest of my life if I tell you how to get into the safe or if I saw anything that I wasn't supposed to talk about. People just need to know these things are secure, and it's not just in Kentucky. You have to check the gold in the Federal Reserve. Is that ours? Is it marked ours? Where is all of it? Why is that important?
Has it been rehypothecated? I think I learned that word from you, Glenn.
You did.
Rehypothecation.
Yes.
Who knows what they've done with it? Is it actually gold? Is it bricks? Is it chocolate truffles pretending to be gold? I don't know, but we need to see it. So
have you talked to President Trump about this? I mean, they seem serious. He seems serious about going, but we can't just go in for a photo op. Like in the 1950s, only 3 piles were examined. And only 3 bars, I think, were examined, but they drilled into them, they tested, and they were fine, 99.9% fine gold. But we didn't do that in the 70s. And I wonder, have they been rehypothecated? Is it our gold or somebody else's gold on lease? Is it still fine gold? And how much do we have?
Right. And has it been hollowed out? Have they changed the alloys? There are all kinds of things. When you go for that many years without anybody from the outside world coming in to do an audit, there are all kinds of things. Remember, since then, We've, with the Bretton Woods development, we've gone off the gold standard. And so there are all kinds of things that could have happened in the meantime. That's why the people's elected representatives need to be allowed in. And I'm thrilled now that they are going to be.
So who actually owns the gold? Is the Federal Reserve? Why are they holding our gold? Who owns it?
My understanding is that it's owned by the United States government. The dollars that we have in circulation issued by the Federal Reserve Bank are certificates, but since we've been off of the gold standard, off of any kind of precious metal standard, there's nothing in there guaranteeing the holder of that note to be able to exchange it in return for a certain quantity of gold or other precious metals. So the gold itself is owned by the United States government, and it harkens back to a time when these were gold or previously silver certificates.
Who should be in charge of this, Mike? Who's the most serious, trustworthy person? I mean, we have to have somebody from both sides of the aisle. We have to have all kind of walks of life. It can't be, Mitch McConnell was the last guy to go in there. That's not going to be helpful. We need to have people from all walks of life that are credible. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm credible, but we have to have credible people in there that people will trust.
Yeah. Well, I would say here, you are somebody who has called this out for many years. You're one of the first people who got me thinking about it many years ago. And I think that's a testament to the fact that you've been persistent about this, that this is finally getting airtime, and it's a mainstream issue. This used to be a fringe issue. People would roll their eyes if you talk about Fort Knox, about what happened to the gold, and it's not happening anymore. So this does need to be credible, and I agree. It needs to be more than just one or two people who go in. And so I'm very much looking forward to this. It does make me wonder, though, what have they been hiding all these years? Why have they been so stingy? Why have they been so completely penurious with not just access to it, but even information about what's going on there? Fort Knox is stored, has this very storied past of protecting our treasures. From the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution during World War II, and it's part of our national heritage. So if we could protect our foundational documents there, surely we can handle a few members of the public, and including maybe a member of media or two and a senator or two walking through its doors. The gold stored there does in fact belong to the American people, not to the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a private for-profit corporation. And they've got every right to know that it's exactly where it should be and how much is there.
The Queen, I mean, that they think it looked like it was like, I don't know, at a fair when she was walking through the gold reserves. It should be something that is, we don't need to see how the doors open or any of the security. We don't need to see any of that. Just show us the gold with the serial numbers. What would the ramifications be, Mike, with us off of the gold standard if we found out it wasn't our gold, or it's been rehypothecated, or whatever? What would happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting question you raised. We're flying kind of blind there because of the fact that this is the inevitable consequence of getting to the point where you've just got a pure fiat currency, and it's more or less just paper. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, which is an abstract concept. But the full faith and credit of the United States does have some backing, some validity beyond the mere fiction.
Sure.
If it's understood that we've got a vast sum of money worth of gold there. Those resources, those assets are part of the full faith and credit of the United States. And so I would think it would be very bad for the standing of the dollar worldwide if it were discovered, heaven forbid, that it's just not there.
Have you talked to the Treasury Secretary at all about what he meant by we need to monetize our asset sheet? He said it didn't include gold, but what does that mean?
I suspect what he's talking about there is that, number one, the American people need and deserve to know what assets the United States government holds, what tangible, real assets it has, and what that's worth. Now, the good news there is that gold is a global commodity. It has an established value. It fluctuates constantly, but it holds its value over time quite well. And so that's why this is such an important part of that. I think this is consistent with an objective I've heard discussed by others within the Trump administration, to the effect that assets generally held by the federal government should be evaluated. We should know what their worth is, including its land holdings, its gold holdings, and anything else we've got.
I mean, imagine what the national parks are worth. I mean, it would help us on our balance sheet, at least. We would look a little more healthy. I hate to put that stuff on an asset sheet because then creditors, God forbid we ever, we don't stop our spending, which I don't know we're going to. We don't stop our spending, then those things can easily go away. Mike, looking at DOGE, they say they're going to cut $1 trillion. I hope so. I truly hope so, but it should be $2 trillion. With the pushback everybody is giving on, trying to cut any of these insane programs. Last night, when I saw what was being revealed with our NSA and CIA and the deeply disturbing mental illness that is happening at those agencies on their little chat systems on our secure servers, I have to tell you, Mike, I'm really close to saying they don't respect the president, who's duly elected. Congress is no longer passing the laws on what can be spent and what can't be spent. These people don't seem to work for anybody. Where is my representation? No taxation without representation. This is grotesque what's happening right now in our country.
Right. And it's even worse than that, Glenn. It's not just taxation without representation. It's also regulation and legislation without representation. Most of our laws are now made by men and women, not of our own choosing. However well-intentioned, well-educated, and hardworking, highly specialized they might be, they don't work for you. They don't work for me. I've got this monument to how bad this is in my office here in Washington. 100,000 pages a year. I've got this stack 13 feet tall of the regulations just promulgated last year by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. Now, that regulatory text is legally binding as law. If you violate one of those, once it's in effect, it can put you in prison. It can result in millions of dollars of fines. It can shut down your business. And yet those are affirmative legal obligations foisted on the American public without the assent of their elected lawmakers. And as you know, Glenn, Article 1, Sections 1 and 7 make clear that you cannot make a federal law but by Congress.
Yeah.
Congress, since the late 1930s, has gotten around this by delegating it. And for reasons I don't understand, the courts haven't put an end to it, even though it's wildly unconstitutional.
I've only got 5 seconds. I've only got 5 seconds. We need to get the REINS Act passed, Mike. We have to have that done and restore representation in our country. From Dallas, good night.